Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 40th Annual CALLERLAB Convention here in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. Today, Raleigh, Cary, Durham, North Carolina. You're in North Carolina. Today is the 26th of March, and the name of this panel session today, intersession, is Near Sight. There's going to be a session going on later today called Far Sight, and this session is geared for beginner sight method. The other one is labeled as advanced sight method, but we'll certainly talk about all the methods, and depending on your experience, you'll determine whether you're nearsighted or farsighted. My name is Ken Ritucci. I come from West Springfield, Massachusetts, and to my right is Mr. Ed Foote, who comes from Wexford, Pennsylvania. Ed is an accredited caller coach, as I am as well. And I'm going to record the results of your hand raising in a second, but basically, by a show of hands, how many are brand new and have never really sight called at all? I don't believe you. 1, 2, 3, about 5. Well, I don't believe him either. 3 to 5. How many are relatively new to sight calling that have started to try sight calling and are really still practicing it? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 8 or so. Okay. And how many have been sight calling for couple of years, quite some time, most of your calling career? So some of you might be in the far-sighted. Yes and no? Okay. All right. And might be a silly question, but might not. How many really don't know what sight calling is? Okay, well, raise your hand. I'm going to turn it over to Ed in a few minutes, and we have lots of great handouts in the back. Please, if you didn't get them, don't get up now, but get them on the way out. There's plenty of them there. And sight calling, as you know, I personally love sight calling. I would say that when I was learning to call in the 70s, we were taught modules, but the big thing in the 70s was sight calling. That was the latest and greatest hot thing coming along. And I went to caller school, and they said, you're going to learn sight calling. I didn't know what it was, but I said, okay. So I did. And I've loved it ever since, because there are different methods of sight calling. There's the easier going up the ladder to things we call burnt image or isolated sight, or you might hear terms called two-couple or four-couple sight. But the easiest one, the one that's the most freewheeling, is called extemporaneous sight calling. And what that means is it just frees you up to call anything you want to call. And then when it comes time to resolve, that's when you have to start matching up some people. And you'll always be able to tell a new sight caller, because if you're dancing and they're going along really good, and then in their mind something clicks and it says, oh, it's time to resolve. And all of a sudden the train goes slower and slower and slower, because they're starting to do this. They're standing up and they're looking, square through forward in the middle of the lane, and they get to the corner and swing through, and the boys run, bend the line, and a right and left through, and pass through, and they're starting to look, and as one caller calls it, hunt and peck. But the beauty of sight calling is that there are methods that work, and Ed will talk about some of the methods. We'll certainly get up and show you. If you use the method, if you don't have a method, you want to learn, I suggest that you learn a method. As you get more experience, as some of you in the audience know, you eventually sort of morph out of that. You grow out of it. You don't use the same routine to resolve, because you get more experienced in your calling, and you can start to see on the fly, a get out coming up. And you'll say, oh, all I have to do is say, pass through, wheel and deal, and centers pass through, and they're there, But you might say, it took me 2 years, I couldn't see that. How many are struggling with the resolution right now? Be honest. Yeah, it's because there's two parts to sight calling. There's sight calling, and then there's sight resolution. And the resolution, so you have the question and you have the answer. And as much as we might want to just keep calling and calling and calling, you have to bring them home. You have to reward the dancers. You can't keep your sequences so long that the dancers get tired, or you get tired, or you might even lose track. One of the biggest things I hear from beginner sight callers is, I can't remember who a primary couple is or my secondary couple. Has anyone ever experienced that? Well, there's something simple. You can write it down. Seriously, some of the best callers in the world, before you square up, go to a festival and notice some of them. They'll be sitting here and they'll be writing down Bob and Mary, Tim and Sue, whatever. And the other problem we run into, I hear it all the time at my schools, is when I say, well, what happened? You didn't quite get the resolution. Well, and you wrote it down. I go, yeah, but I forgot to look. So they don't look. If you write it down, it's there for a purpose. Look, okay? If you feel you can resolve without writing it down, that's great. Personally, I don't write it down. I never got in the habit of writing it down. Writing it down is good. It's not a bad thing. If you're having problems remembering, and we will get into how can you remember certain couples in a square and things like that. But if you're having problem remembering, write it down. And if you write it down, try to remember to read it. That's a big, I can't tell you, about $1 for every time I had a caller say to me, I didn't look. I know I wrote it down. I didn't look. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to write it down, use it. So there's a reason for writing it down. But this is going to be a fun session. We're going to get some of you up dancing. We're going to show you some really neat things. And we're going to show you, there's enough in the handouts and what we're going to show you that you will have methods that you can walk out of here and use. These are true methods that if you follow the procedure, they work. The only other problem I run into with student callers or newer callers is that they don't follow all the steps. They go A, B, D, E, G, X instead of going all the way through. And I'll say, well, do you know why it didn't work? And half the time they don't know, but they'll say, well, yeah, but I figured if I just put them over there, I didn't need to do that, and then I can do this. And I go, well, did it work? No. Okay, so I strongly recommend 37 years of calling, 30 years of teaching callers, sight calling. Seriously, learn a method. Learn two methods as you get more comfortable. And eventually you will not be using the method per se. You'll be morphing out of it, and you'll be resolving in much more creative ways, which probably maybe the far-sighted session will probably show you for the more experienced callers. But if you're a newbie or a semi-newbie, learn the method. Where's Diane and her husband? Diane, you went to the school. Did you use the method? And when you went home, it worked? No, I didn't pay her to say that. But she came up to me and said, we're using your sight resolution methods, and they work, don't they? They do work, provided you follow the plan. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Ed Foote, a.k.a. Swami.
Morph, I like that term there, morph. Let me just follow up on one thing he mentioned while I'm thinking of it. The only thing in life that is infallible, life as a whole, the only thing that is infallible are the rules for these sight methods. If you follow them step by step, you will always be successful. And if you forget a step or don't do it correctly, you'll get messed up. The formulas are infallible. We have a mixed group here, so I'm going to try to do something for everyone. And by the way, before we're done today, for those who are psych calling and have been doing it for a while, any problems you are having with psych calling, we will answer today. We will solve any psych calling problems you have while we're here. First, let me say, for the people that said they've never psych called or just kind of dabbling with it, before you start the psych call, you need to be stress-free. You need to be relaxed and comfortable. And how do you get relaxed and comfortable? You learn modules.
Yes.
And you learn a bunch of modules, and you learn how to do modular calling, because that provides the foundation. And then we build psych calling on the foundation of modules. And if we have a strong foundation, then we can build a nice building, and the building stands there. But if we jump right into psych calling without the strong foundation, we don't have a foundation. We have quicksand down there, and then the building's going to topple. So it's vital that you have modules and know modules and can do some modular calling. Second, I encourage everyone to have some written down material. It could be the modules. When your brain goes completely blank up there, you still have to physically be able to call. And the way you're physically able to call is to have material. I can't think of a thing, you just glance down and read it. That's the only time I advocate reading. I don't advocate reading as a method, but I do advocate having some prepared material so that when you get into a mental crisis or you get all stressed out, or say you're citing and you forget who the corner is and you lose the corner, you don't get there, so now you're nervous, you can back off and read a couple sequences before you go back to start to cite again. So those are two things, modules and have some prepared material. The third thing, before you start the psych call, and maybe even now that you're into psych calling, you have to know the starting and ending formations of every call. Whatever program you're calling, if it's mainstream, it's mainstream. If you're calling plus, and it's mainstream and plus. You have to know the starting and ending formations of every call. And so if I give you the name of the call and the starting formation, if I give you the starting formation and then the name of the call, you have to be able to give me the ending formation in 2 seconds. If it's 4 seconds, it's too long. You don't know it well enough. So if I say lines facing out, the call is tag the line. What's the answer? Completed double pass through. If you had to say, well, let me think. Oh yeah, completed. Too long. You've got to know these perfectly. So how do we do that? The very simple way is you take a sheet of paper, across the top, you write the name of the call, tag the line. 2 columns. The left column says starting formation. That's the title of the left column. And the right column, the title is ending formation. Number 1, lines facing out. Ending formation, completed double pass through. Number 2, 2 face lines. Ending formation, completed double pass through. And you make the list for tag the line. You do that for every call. You do that for all the calls. Now, fortunately, some of the calls you don't have to do it for. Circle right, circle left, and right and left grand. You don't have to bother with those. So we have, 67, 68 calls on the mainstream list. You really need to do that for the meat calls, the meaty calls, 35 to 40 calls. And then for the plus calls, you need to do it for everyone. What you're going to have when you're done, now this will admittedly take a little bit of time, but when you're done, you have this wad of paper that's invaluable, because now you can test yourself and you can ask anybody else to test you. They don't even have to know how to square dance. You just hand them a sheet of paper and say, tell me the name of the call and the starting formation, see if I know the ending formation. Just dragging anybody off the street. They don't have to know how to square dance. All they have to do is know how to read. Once you can always answer that question of what the ending formation is, then you're ready to psych call. If you're already psych calling and haven't done that, or maybe you've tried some and haven't done it completely, you need to go back and do that. Because the key to psych calling is to make quick, fast decisions. As Ken said, when it's time to resolve, you're hemming and hawing and don't know what to do next. And even before we're talking about the resolve, some callers, all they do is call pass through, bend the line, right and left through, and then the chicken plucker, pass through, trade by, right and left through. And lots of times, and I do a number of private sessions, and I'm always saying, give me some meat, give me some calls, because people seem to be locked into maybe 10 calls. Now, the flip side of what I just said, we have the name of the call, the left column, the right column. The flip side of that is you go through, and the title of your sheet is the name of the formation. So the formation name is facing lines. The left-hand column is name of call. Right-hand column is still the same, ending formation. So facing lines, number 1, pass through. Ending formation, lines facing out. Number 2, from the title facing lines, number 2, touch a quarter. What's the ending formation? Columns, right? Good, you said it in 1 second to beat the 2 seconds. That's good. So that's the flip side of it, and that's a good way to do it too. Now, you don't have to write out all the sheets of paper if you are mentally disciplined enough to be able to do this exercise on your own. Most people I've found can't think of all the formation names. They'll think of 1 or 2. You need to be able to think of them all. And the neat thing is when you're practicing calling your psych calling, you can lay these sheets, even if you're calling a dance or calling your guest tip at your local club, you can lay one of these sheets down and say, I'm going to theme this call in my tip. And there's all your answers right there. You know everything that's going to happen. No surprises. And if there are no surprises, there is no stress. And the key to calling is no stress. So all of this is designed for no stress.
Good luck. Well, Ed's looking at his notes, but we're not even really delving into psych calling yet because there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be laid, especially for newer callers. I can't tell you the amount of callers I see. If you don't know what to call, it doesn't matter if you're using a module. Well, I guess if you're reading it, then you know what to call. It's in front of you. But if you were trying to memorize a module or any other method that's out there, forget about psych calling. Let's just say it was crayons. Let's say it was something, mental imagery. You still have to come up with something. You physically have to say something. And where newer callers tend to get into problems is they don't know what to call. And they don't know what to call because they don't know where one call begins and where one call ends. And that comes into a critical time when your mind clicks resolve. And it's all of a sudden, well, how do I resolve? What do I call? You got to juggle about 10 balls in the air. You got to keep your timing going. You got to breathe. You got to enunciate. You got to have good diction. You got to move the dancers. At the same time, in your mind, you're starting to resolve. They don't know that. Only you know that. But you have to know where one call ends and another one begins, because you got to keep your timing going. You got to hope that it's smooth dancing. And you have to juggle all these balls in the air while you're trying to do a very difficult thing in the beginning called resolution.
Something else that Ken mentioned, he said, to remember your primary and secondary couples, write them down. I agree to a certain point. If that's the only way you can remember them, then write them down. But the best way is not to write them down. Why? Because you want to train your mind. You want your mind to be this finely tuned piano, that it's this high degree of alertness. And so if you haven't written them down, your mind says, boy, I better concentrate here. because they're not written down. But if you've written them down, your mind says, I can slough off here because all I got to do is look down on the paper. And so your mind isn't getting trained. And your mind has to be trained so that you can instantly know. When it comes to resolving, I'm not talking about the other first 95%. When it comes to resolving, you can you instantly know who your primary and secondaries are. Now, this is vital because we know that the rule of thumb is we know primary and secondary couples in 3 squares, right? How many can do primary and secondary couples in 3 squares? Thank you, Mrs. Colombo.
Half credit.
How many can do 2 squares? How many can do 1 couple? What we're doing here, we're playing the odds. If you know primary and secondary couples in 3 squares, the odds of all 3 going down the drain at the same time is pretty remote. But if you only have 1 square, and that square breaks down, you're in big trouble. In addition, if all you can remember is 1 square, you're going to call nothing. You're going to call a very uninteresting dance because you're going to know, woe to me if that square breaks down, so I'm going to call nothing. I'm just going to call right and left through, pass through, bend a line. Right and left through, start through, pass through, right and left through. You're going to call nothing because you're so paranoid that that square is going to break down. So that's why we say primary and secondary couples in 3 squares. Now you say, I'm lucky to remember 1 or 2 couples. How am I going to remember 6? Well, we have this wonderful handout entitled Hints for Remembering Who the Primary and Secondary Couples Are in 3 Squares. And we'll go over that in a little bit. Don't read it now because you're taking that home. But we'll go over that in a second. And one thing Ken mentioned too, and I'll just inject this for maybe the more experienced psych callers. The question always comes up, how long should I call before a left allemande? My answer is never longer than 60 seconds. Because you want to give the dancers a lot of carrots. The carrot for the dancer is the left allemande. We were successful here. We do the right left. Now we go back. We're successful again. We're successful again. Some callers will call 3-minute, 4-minute sequences, and the dancers are like, tell us we were successful. Give us a left allemande. And maybe the caller can't because he or she forgot who the primary and secondaries are. But that's a good rule to keep in the back of your mind, even as an experienced psych caller. 60 seconds at most. My rule of thumb is 45. Once I hit 45 seconds, I'm looking to get out. We have the handouts back there, and I'm just jumping around here. The three methods of psych calling: two-face line sight, facing line sight, and isolated sight. These are the 3 most popular methods of psych calling. There are others, and there are other methods of control. These have proven the test of time, over the test of time, that these have been successful. And of these 3, which one have the majority of callers found works best for them? Two-face line sight. That seems to be the one that most callers feel most comfortable with.
How many use the two-face line sight?
Okay. How many use facing line sight? How many go back and forth between them? That's good. That's the ultimate goal, to be able to go back and forth between them. How many of you call and you say, I don't use any method, I just, whenever I see them left allemande, and I call it?
Yeah, but be honest now, the ones who all raise their hands, again, going back to what I originally said, they are the more experienced callers that through all the years started out with something, and it's just morphed into the experience of seeing. How many have tried to resolve using circulator trades through parallel ocean waves? Right, which is very similar to the two-face line method. You just got them in an ocean wave as opposed to a two-face line.
Yeah, I like two-face lines because it's easy to see partner relationship in there. Waves is fine. To me, waves is phase 2. Once you got the two-face line method down, phase 2 is going to the ocean waves. Newer callers who say, well, I don't have a method, I just call it. And when I see it, they're doomed. because they never see it. They never get there. Now, granted, the experienced psych callers, we're flying along. We see something instantly. We can bail out right there for a neat left alley man. You must have a method. So if your mind goes completely blank, say you're an experienced psych caller, and you can do an all-eight circulate to a right and left grand and all this stuff, and some night you haven't gotten enough sleep and you're just brain dead, you can fall back on the method. On the method that's on the sheet, you can always fall back to that because the method is infallible. You can always fall back on that. So that's why you need a method. And then say, well, I'm just going to freewheel when I see something. No. You have to have a method. That's the foundation. Then you build on that.
Just piggyback on that for a second, that even more experienced callers that I've worked with, and I know Ed has, they'll call, and I'll listen to them call for the first time, and they're moving dancers, and they'll resolve, and there's not many problems there, but they always use the same method of resolution. Where, they get them into the middle, and there's the 50-50 chance, and there's the friends and the enemies, and they're either the corners behind them or the corners in front of them. Is it a pass-through, square through three? But I'll notice some of the more experienced callers use the same get-out. And I'm thinking, okay, so let me be a little bit more picky on the more experienced callers. Well, your dancers may not pick up on that. Some of them will. If you have some sharp dancers after a while, how many times have you heard dancers say, oh, we know exactly what our caller is going to call? No one's ever heard that? Show of hands. How many have heard that from either a club? All right, so it does exist out there. I've actually had one dancer come up to me and say that they were first taught and they thought that boys run was part of swing through because that's the way their caller always taught it. Swing through, boys run. It was all one call to them. And warning is, as you get more experienced in psych calling, force yourself to start changing up your resolution methods. If you use these as crutches to start out of the gate, but then especially, and the best time to practice, of course, is with your own group. You know the people. If you have a chance to, how many have a group they can call to on a weekly basis? Many of you. Okay. For those of you who don't, hopefully you'll be getting that because that's a nice time to practice. It's practice because you know the people. You know who's married to who's partners with who normally dances with who. And even if they don't, like in the gay clubs when they call, they may switch up every tip, but that's okay because you know them all. So it's just a matter of there's a comfort zone there. Lots of times newer callers will try to go out and start these kind of things like at a guest dance where they don't know many people. And that's tricky to do. So if you have a weekly group you can call for, these are the places you want to practice, okay? If you make a mistake there, it's really no big deal, especially if you know you're new, the dancers understand. But for the more experienced callers out there, if you find you're still resolving the same way, whether it's one of these methods or not, but somehow you're using the same steps to get to the resolution, then I challenge you to start to break that up a little bit because you need to grow. We won't grow unless we try new things. Ed?
Yeah. Before we get up and maybe walk one of these methods, I think this is a good point to jump in. Ken was saying about work with your home group first. How do we remember primary and secondary couples in 3 squares? That's 6 couples. Geez, how can I remember that many? Here's the key. You're going to start with your home group. You establish in your mind permanent primary couples. You select 4 or 5 couples in your club. You know everybody in your club. 4 or 5 that are permanent primary couples. They will be your primary couple, and I think we all recognize the term primary and secondary couple for psych calling. They are your permanent primaries for life. Not just this tip or next tip, not just for tonight, this week, next month. They are your permanent primaries. So you will never forget them. If you meet them walking down the street, you say, hi, primary couple. They're just so ingrained in your mind. So what has that done? We want to remember primary and secondaries in 3 squares. no mental effort to remember the primary couple. That's a key rule. No mental effort to remember the primary couple. How do we have no mental effort? We've established permanent primaries. There's no mental effort there. So now the only mental effort is the secondaries. 3 couples. And most everybody here said, oh, I could remember 3. Well, if you remember them in this fashion, then it's only 3 couples. At my club, I have some permanent secondary couples. One couple's kind of short. I say, you look like a secondary couple to me. So I have some permanent secondary couples. That's how you remember. And that's how now you don't have to write them down because you've established who your primary couples are. All you have to do is remember the secondary couple in each square. Another key for the newer people in psych calling, at schools and things like this, we always use couple number 1 as a primary, couple number 4 as a secondary, and a lot of callers feel they have to do that. No, it's the primary is the easiest couple for you to remember in the square. You look at a square, one couple leaps out, that's your primary couple. If you look at a square and nobody leaps out, if everybody's blah, you do not use that square. Why? Because of the rule. No mental effort to remember the primary couple. If you have to use mental effort, remember the primary couple, no good. But you've established permanent primary couples. So you don't have to do work to remember them. So, did you want to follow up on? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to see how many have not seen any of the formal methods of site resolution. Is there anybody in the room that has not seen it at all? How many have not really tried it at all? Everyone's at least called and tried to use some form of a method, okay, with outstanding success. Never been an issue. Everyone here has always had 100% success. Okay.
That's good. We can jump ahead to. Well, let's do this then. Do you want to jump ahead now to questions on problems they have right now?
Okay, but the question, yeah. John, come on over and use the microphone.
I haven't seen all of them work. I know I've tried one, but I haven't seen some of them facing lines, or 2 face lines. So I have never seen facing lines work.
Okay. So let's get a square up. We'll show you facing lines. Ed's going to show you facing lines. Well, yeah. Do you have bibs? Oh my, thank you. We have bibs, pennies.
No. They're called brown. When you're a hillbilly, they're bibs.
Do they have numbers on them?
Let's give Doug Davis's school a plug because he has the bibs there.
Yeah. if you're a hillbilly,
that's good.
Bibs. If you're from the city, you're a Mountain William.
Okay.
Then they're pennies.
So here, take these colored bibs. They're going to have a number on them. Please make sure. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. For those listening, we're putting the bibbies on. Okay. I want you to stir the bucket twice. Because we're going to do like everybody else does and have couple number 1 be the primary couple, so we're going to have them as you are the caller. You are looking at couple number 1. Okay, so the fundamental thing of facing line sight, we establish a primary and secondary, as you always do, so we're going to establish couple number 1 as primary, couple number 4 as secondary. Heads back out to the right and make a line. Okay. Let's move this. Yeah, let's push that back a little. Push that thing
Okay,
back.
Thanks, Mike. All right. Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, so we go along, we call whatever we want to call, and when we want to resolve, we get back to facing lines. We get back to, quote, normal facing lines. That means boy, girl. And for the simplest method of the system, we get the primary couple on the left side of the line. Now, I'm talking the most fundamental, basic thing of this system. Obviously, some of you are probably already into a couple shortcuts. That's fine. We'll get to them. The most fundamental, basic method of the system, primary couple on the left, and everybody, in this case, has their partner. Well, if everybody has their partner, it's an element left right here, right?
The zero line.
Zero line. It's a zero line, or one of the memorized get-outs from a zero line, slide through, square through 3. You don't have to do that.
Right.
Okay. Everybody pass through and bend the line. Now the primary couple is on the left. Secondary couple is in the same line down on the right side. The formula says, whenever you have this, it's 2 calls to a left allemande. Star through, pass through. Go ahead. Star through, pass through. It's allemande left. Okay, and just, you know, to do that, square back up. Or actually, get back in that line you had. That'll even save us time. Get
zero line.
Zero line with the primary on the left. I knew this was a gamble to say that. But. All right. Now, let's have the, to save time, let's have the end ladies diagonal chain. Now, I wouldn't call that. I'm just doing that to set it up.
Right.
So I'm cruising along. I'm calling. I'm starting to resolve facing lines. I get the primary couple on the left. And I now look at the secondary girl. Once I have the primary couple matched, then I look at the secondary girl and I ask the question, does she or doesn't she have her original partner? If she doesn't, the next 2 calls are automatic, pass through, wheel and deal. And now the last step of the method, I physically look at girl 4 and ask myself the question, which one of 2 calls will bring her to the primary man? It's either square through 3 or pass through. Obviously here, it's square through 3. Don't do it. The fast way to make that decision, sometimes newer callers say, all right, they're in there. Yeah, I'm not sure what is a square through 3 or pass. The fast snap method to answer that question, you look at girl 4 and say, if she did a pass through, would she hit her primary man? If the answer is yes, you do it. If the answer is no, you call square through 3. That's how you make the decision real fast. All right. Go ahead. Square through 3. It's what? Partner trade? You could call partner trade.
Yeah,
I don't like to call partner trades from starting double pass through. Okay, everybody slide through. That's the basic. Any questions on the basic method?
No, but I have a point on that. Somebody, for the tape purposes, somebody said, well, why don't you just call partner trade and you can element from there? Yeah, you could, but again, going back to what I said, we have to juggle 8 balls, 10 balls, 12 balls in the air. You have to try to put a complete package together. And that is a common suggestion I hear at many of the schools that I do. Well, somebody will say, well, just do a center's trade, and there you go. You know, it's like, why do we got to do all this? Because, I don't know, after a partner trade in the middle is not a lot of space. It's not the smoothest call. So if we really want to be right and thorough of how we're going to resolve, then you got to keep in mind choreographic and body flow as well. Yes, it will work, but it's really not the best method to work. Okay?
And why doesn't it? Let's show why it doesn't work. Everybody star through, pass to the center. But let's say you got a floor of weak dancers.
All right.
And I say, centers, partner trade, they're looking at each other. They may walk up and grab each other. And now they shouldn't, and they don't dance well because they would. But our goal is to have them be successful and get to the left allemande. So we don't want to call anything that's rolling the dice. And if I called partner trade from here, I'm rolling the dice.
Well, and here's another reason why I would recommend you never do it. Do a double pass through. First couple left, next couple right. Okay, so you got facing lines. All right, now let's watch the couples coming into the center. Pass through, wheel and deal. Center's partner trade. Notice the body flow. The body flow for the lead dancers was to come forward. Anytime you have flow action through the center of your set, they're going forward. They want to go forward. If you start giving them commands that stop on a dime and have to jerk body back the other way, you're just asking. It's a recipe for disaster. We need to keep it flowing. So that's another reason why, yes, center's trade would work, but it wouldn't flow. And if it doesn't flow, you don't want to do it.
But the creative use of center's trade in there is you say pass through, wheel and deal, centers wheel around as a couple, and you're right there. Because that's right in with the flow.
Because of the flow.
But you have to say it with those words. Now we're into creative choreography, and presentation is 50%. So I don't just say centers wheel around. Who knows where they're going to be? I'm going to say centers wheel around as a couple to face the outsides. It's what I call using off-the-street terminology. I can put anybody in off the street and say centers wheel around to the left, face the outside, and they're going to do it. Okay. Ready for phase 2 on this now?
Sure. Any questions on that? We have a microphone. If you got questions, comments, now's your time.
Okay, everybody star through. Pass the ocean. Split circulate. Okay. We now have, for those listening, we have same-sex right-hand waves. So let's say now I want to resolve. The first thing people new to Psych say, well, where's the primary man? Where's it? No. The first thing you do, you got to get them to the name of the method. The name of the method is facing lines, so we got to get them to facing lines. Explode the wave. Partner trade. Now they're to the name of the method. The next step, we don't even look at primaries now. The next step is we get them to normal facing lines. Star through, lead couple California twirl, star through. Now we have normal facing lines. Only once we get to normal facing lines do we then look at the primary couple and get them with each other. And sometimes newer people to Psych and say, well, yeah, I guess I could call a lady's chain here, but oftentimes they can't think of anything else. What else can we call beside a lady's chain to get the primary together? Star through. Okay, what else? Flutter wheel. What else? Reverse flutter wheel. Okay, let's do it for simplicity here for the walkthrough. Let's just do the lady's chain so we get some over there. So now we have the primary couple together. So now do we look at secondary girl? No, because the primary is not on the left.
Not yet.
Not yet. We got to get them on the left. Phase 2 says they don't have to be on the left, they can be on the right, but that's phase 2. We're still in phase 1. So we want them on the left, right, and left through. Now they're on the left. Now we look at the secondary girl. She is not with her partner, means the next 2 calls are automatic, pass through, wheel, and deal. One of 2 calls brings girl 4 to boy 1. Obviously, same as the last time, it's square through 3. You don't have to do that. That's it. That's the basic fundamental facing lines method. Now let's do this. Let's have the centers pass through, swing through, boys run, bend the line. Phase 2 says, all right, bend the line again. Phase 2 says the primary doesn't have to be on the left, they can be on the right. If everybody has their partner, we can see if we got boy 4 over here, it's lines out of sequence, star through, pass through, Alaman left. If couple number 4 were down here on the left with couple number 1, it would be an Alaman left right there, or our memorized get out a slide through, square through 3. If secondary couple doesn't have their partner, it's the same rule as when the primary couple was on the left. It's pass through, wheel, and deal. The only exception is here, we always want the primary couple on the outside, right. So we have to zoom them out of there. So zoom out of there. One of 2 calls brings girl 4 to boy 1. I ask myself the question, is it a pass through? The answer is yes, so I call it. Because it's easy for me to see her face walking up to his face. Okay, questions on that? You wanted your cookie. Oh.
Okay, Alaman left to square up. Yeah, there's 3 little things I always teach. Get them, put them, and look. Get them, meaning get the primary couple together. Put them on the left-hand side of the line, and then you look. And then you look at through the number 1 man's eyes. You look across from him, and there is going to be different combinations. Maybe everybody's got their partner. It's a 0 line. maybe his corner is down on the other end. Okay, so it's an out of sequence line. So Ed showed you a star through, pass through. Okay, maybe two couples are paired, two aren't. Then the next calls are automatic, pass through, wheel and deal, and then in the middle it's either a square through 3 or it's a pass through. So you get them, you put them, and you look. Get them, put them, look. And the reason why I understand phase 2, but if you want to tighten it up and you want to challenge yourself to resolve in less calls, that's why I normally will show the callers, put the primary couple on the left-hand side of the line, so then when you do the wheel and deal, they're already where? Where would they be after that, if they're on the left-hand side of the line? A pass to wheel and deal. Where's our matched pair? They would be on the outside. So you eliminate the zoom. It's not a big deal if you have to zoom square through 3 or zoom pass through. It's not a big deal. But if we want to tighten it up, we want to get better, especially for the more experienced callers here, challenge yourself to tighten it up a little bit and say, well, if I want to resolve in quicker calls, I don't want to say zoom square through 3, so I'll put my primary on the left-hand side.
Yeah, and that's good, except it may take you 2 or 3 calls to get them on the left.
Well, maybe.
Now
maybe
that brings us to another. That brings us to another point. How fast should a good psych caller be able to resolve to a left allemande? No, and it's a fallacy to say how many calls. You know that thing that can always resolve in 3 calls or 5 calls. No, we can set these people up so they never resolve. You know, 12 seconds. 12 seconds to resolve to a left allemande. If you can do that 5 times in a row with me standing behind you, snapping my finger and say go, then I know you got it. Why 12 seconds? Maybe I'll give you 15 seconds. Maybe. It's because once you've done some neat material, you've built them up to this kind of high, then you want to keep them there and hit your left allemande quick so they get, gee, we just did this good stuff, and now we're rewarded with the left allemande. But if it takes you 30, 45 seconds to get to the corner, they come down off the mountain, and now by the time you eventually get to the left allemande, it's down here, and it's just another left allemande. Plus, getting there quick keeps your mind sharp. Where's the primary? Where's the secondary? That's what, now, 12 seconds or 15 seconds to get to the corner, might not be able to do it with just the one method. That's why it's good to have 2 methods. If you can combine 2 face lines with facing lines, and you start with one method, and then you say, oops, wait a minute, I can bail out to the other method, that's how you do it. That's how you get to your 12 and 15 seconds. And that's what we do at school. If somebody says, I got this stuff, I know how to psych call, and you just stand behind them and say, start calling, and snap the fingers, and they have 12 seconds to make it. Make it 5 times in a row, we know they got it.
Take the pennies off for a minute, the bibs, and put them on the table, and then just square up as you are. Okay, so let's get a little bit more real world here for a minute, okay? Unless you make enough of these for all your dancers back home, believe me, I've always had students say, I'm going to make a set of these, and I'm going to have my dancers wear them right in front of me on Wednesday night, and this way I'll be able to resolve. But let's take a look at this square. Now, they squared up. We didn't know how they were going to square up. You didn't know how they were going to square up. But let's just say you're up here and you're about to start calling. What about this square would match? Didn't you start out with Dan? Oh, you didn't have Dan. Okay. All right. So what in your eyes? Now, what works for you? You'll see something totally different than we'll see, that I might see. So if I was going to cite this call, I'll tell you what, if I was going to cite call this set, I would look at, well, I'm not you. No, I ain't looking at you. I'm looking at, and I'm colorblind. I really am. To me, this is all blue. Blue, purple, blue. I don't care. I really am bad. And I know Diane. So that's enough for me at this point. And Diane's partner is the only guy wearing plaid. So in my mind, I make a snapshot of blue or purple, Diane, and plaid. That's all I need to know. But that's me. Ed, what would you look at?
Exact same thing. I always look for match colors first. Plus, it's easy to remember my secondary because they're both kind of tall and slender. Perfect secondary couple.
Okay, see,
They go together. They don't match, but they go together.
but see, now that's good because I wouldn't pick out the tall and slender. I would pick out, I know Diane, and he's wearing plaid.
Now, let's say they squared up. The couples 1 and 4 do a right and left through. Let's say they squared up this way. How would I talk to myself here? Still have the same primary. The secondary is sort of color coordinated, not totally, but that his shirt and her, sort of.
That's how
I would remember it.
But see, I'd call that, again, I'm colorblind. I'd call that brown. Is there any brown in that? Well, to me it is.
It's a
and he's
reddish
wearing brown, so you're all brown. So it's blue and brown. The only thing you got to make sure is you don't start calling along. Was it brown and blue, or was it blue and brown? Right. But that's how I would look at this square if I was calling a tip right now.
And let's elaborate.
Well, you got to be careful of that. If there was 2 brown shirts, then you really got to start stretching.
Let's have side ladies chain. Let's say this was how they squared up. This was the original way they go together as partners. This is how they squared up. And let's have the head ladies chain. I look at this square. Let's say this is how they squared up. They came to the dance this way. I look as a guest caller. I look at this square and I say, no way. Everybody in this square is blah to me, so I ignore them and go to another square.
This would be a tougher. Now that makes it a lot tougher when you chain all the ladies around personally. Now, granted, we're here. We all sort of know each. For the most part, you sort of know each other. I know this is Scott. I know this is Diane. I can think Scott's dancing. Scott's corner is Diane. Diane's dancing with Mike. I know all these people. Blah blah blah. I might be able to get away with it. But let's just say I didn't know any of them, or let's just say I knew Diane, but I didn't know the rest of them, and this is how they squared up. I'd probably shy away too, because especially if you're guest calling. You want to be successful, and you want the dancers successful. So why are you going to put yourself in a situation of trying to remember? Now, even writing it down, I don't write it down. But if I had to write this down, I'd probably not do a good job. I don't know what I'd say. Big guy, great slim girl. I don't know. Some people look for shoes. They look for glasses. They look for. Is there young? Is there old? Is there colored hair? Is there gray? I mean, you've got to look for things that are going to stick out for you. I would have a hard time with this square even if I wrote it down.
If I'm a guest caller, and say it's a small club, 2-3 squares,
right.
So I'm locked in, I got to use them. Who in this square stands out to me? Scott. He's the largest.
Sure.
So he's going to be my primary. And now I'm going to have to do some mental effort to remember his partner and the corners. Maybe I have to write him down here. I don't want to write him down. I never write him down. I want to keep my mind highly trained, and I'm always thinking of it as I'm going along. In fact, if I'm calling for a floor of 6, 7, 8 squares or whatever, and I pick out my 3 squares at the start, as I'm calling my material, I'm always looking to pick up a 4th square on the fly. That's an insurance square. More insurance I can have, the better. So I'm always looking to pick up another square. Then, let's say this square that I had chosen proves in the first 60 seconds that they can't do anything. I have no stress because I picked up a 4th square, so how many squares do I have? I got 3 squares, I can forget about them. The whole thing is to keep it organized, stress-free, follow the formula, and you have no trouble.
Yeah, I've had where I had the most color coordinated. It's like wonderful. Go back to where you were originally, ladies, all the ladies. Okay, I start out with something like this, and I go, wow, this is so easy to remember. And I pick out a couple other squares, and the other couple squares maybe not be as color coordinated, and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to pick this square as my first one because I feel comfortable. I know the blues and the browns and whatever. But then they can't dance. They can't do any sequences. They're in lines all the time waiting. I'm just saying. So then you go, all right, well, like Ed said, and you'll find the more you call, you'll drop a square, and sometimes you'll start looking around saying you'll have to pick up another square. Or sometimes I'll get by with 2. And sometimes I've had to get by with just 1. You cut the tip short a little bit. And then, the next thing you do, you roll the dice the next time. But also what I'd like to hear, too, while we have a square up, if you have questions or concerns about what problems you run into when you psych call, please come up and I'll give you this microphone. We want to put it on the mic and we want to hear from you. Now, you all raised your hand and said you're doing some form of psych calling, whether you're beginner, middle of the road, real experience. Tell us your experiences. Tell us what you have trouble with. Can Ed and I answer any of your questions? How do I do this? I run into this. What do I do when that happens? Come on up if you've got any questions.
Yep, now's the time. Any problem you have, we'll solve.
Because if you don't, then we're assuming that when you go to the far site, then you've answered all the questions and it's going to be a piece of cake for Doug back there because everybody knows everything. You know, psych calling to me is an ongoing learning experience. It's practice, practice, practice. Yeah, and state your name, Noel.
Sharon Baldwin, Thomasville, North Carolina. I have more of a problem, and I'll see a formation, and I know there's a call I want to use, and all of a sudden the name of the call is gone. Absolutely gone. Well, I do. I end up calling other things, but it didn't do what I wanted to do. So is there any help to...
Back to the sheets. That formation, you have a sheet with that formation up top. And the left-hand column has every call you can do from it. And the right-hand column has the end result. And you've gone over that sheet. And you've had your partner or husband drill you on that. So now when you look at that formation, the sheet comes into mind and you have no trouble.
And the other thing, too, newer callers don't have as much of a repertoire of choreographic knowledge. You just don't. That comes through experience. It comes through, CALLERLAB's got a great sheet. It's a lot of work, but if you're really serious about learning the other half of psych calling, which is knowing where one call ends, where one call begins, it's called analyzing a call. You can get it off the website. They might have some at the desk. It's a pain in the butt. You really got to work at it. But if you can learn, now, you know, if you could do it for the majority of the mainstream calls, and if you're dancing plus or you're going to call plus, then do it for all the plus. But if you can, and you can memorize, not say memorize, but get familiar with them, even if you just write all that out, it's just like, you know, how you learn by writing things down, you'll learn. But newer callers aren't going to have a full repertoire of every arrangement and every formation of every call on the mainstream list because you're just not there yet. You're not calling the calls that get neglected. Most callers cross folds, cross runs, tag the lines, recycles, things like this. You hear a lot of pass throughs and bend the lines and right and left throughs and star throughs and ladies chains and, you know, the veer to the left and then the veer to the right and all these veers and things like that. But you don't hear a lot of the more meatier calls as Ed had suggested. But if you take the time to say, maybe at Club Night I'm going to theme a tip. Not every tip. I'm going to theme a tip. I'm going to pick cross folds. And I'm going to do my homework ahead of time. And I'm going to really do cross folds for a whole tip. And at that point, you don't do it the rest of the night because you don't want to overdo it. But you spend the whole tip doing cross folds from centers, ends, lines facing out, whatever. You will get to know cross folds so well, you know what? You'll start calling it all the time. And there'll be just another call that you could add as your repertoire when you're psych calling, giving variety, creativity to the dancers, and then even using some of them. You might even find a cross folds or a right and left grand. But how do you get there? Through hard work. There's no easy answer here. I wish we could just wave a wand and say, oh, you're all going to be great psych callers as soon as you leave the room, because that's the way it is.
If they follow the rules, the sheets are infallible.
Other questions, concerns?
And let me add one thing here, too. As newer callers, then, as Ken said, you don't have the experience, so maybe you don't know every call that can be done from every formation. Start off 5 calls from every formation. Facing lines, lines facing out, starting double pass through, completed double pass through. Each one of those formations has its own sheet, and you give yourself 5 calls. And you look at those sheets every day, and you memorize them. You give yourself 5 calls from every formation that you can call, and then you start calling. And once you've worked with them for, say, 6 months, add 2 or 3 calls to each sheet. So, again, it's no stress. If you have 12 calls for every formation, it's overload. So keep it easy on yourself. Just have a few.
The more you do this, the more comfortable you become with the choreography. And the more you're comfortable with your choreography, the more you're going to be comfortable with sight calling. And the more you be comfortable with sight calling, the more you're going to be comfortable with sight resolution, because you're going to have the confidence knowing, well, I know where these calls are. I wrote them down. I've learned them. I've practiced them. I know where people end up after a cross fold. I know that now. So I'm not afraid to say it. If you're not afraid to call it, then you know that you're making progress. And there's just no easy way. People want to just say, I just want to learn a sight call. You know, it can't be that hard. But then you get on the microphone, they don't know what to call. You can't resolve until you've called, until you've mixed up your dancers. Okay, questions?
Another key point on this, too,
Anyone
is
come on up.
You need to be a good dancer. I've always maintained a caller should be able to outdance 90% of the people he or she is calling for. And the old joke that callers can't dance, I don't buy that. Callers should be able to outdance anybody.
One of the things that I like to tell new
Who
callers...
are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Doug Davis from Washington.
Thank
Don't
you.
hold that against me. That's the real Washington, the one over in the Northwest. One of the things that I like to tell new callers especially is practice saying the calls, because you can't call the calls until you can say the calls. Go down the list. What's the first call on the A2 list? Circle left. Okay, so say the calls. Circle left, circle right, and just run down the list. I drive my wife crazy because I'll be going down the road saying the calls.
Yep.
And until you can say them, you cannot call them. Okay? Do you understand what I'm telling you? Everybody?
You have to say them,
Yeah.
you have to know them, be able to pronunciate them. Questions, comments, there's got to be more. Everyone raised their hand. You're all doing great with
Yeah.
sight calling. It's Mike, you got
Everybody here must be perfect. Nobody has any problems.
Well, Mike Hogan from Omaha. I do have a comment. I mean, I've been doing sight calling when I first started calling. I didn't really have anybody teach me what to do, so I just sight called and figured it out, you know. But when they were talking about when you're with your home set that you've got forever primary couples, right? One of the challenges that I get to, and you guys will get to that with your home group after you call for them for a while, I get to thinking a whole lot about the choreography that I want to do, and I know who my primary couples are, so I get a little bit lazy and I start calling and I get them into what I wanted them to do, and then I realize I never actually looked to see who my primary couple's corner was. So you'll fall out of that habit very easily. The other thing that'll happen is sometimes you'll have 2 or 3 of these couples that are typically your primary couple in the same square. And if you don't recognize that right away, you're in trouble, because when you come back to that square, you won't recall which one of the couples you were using at the time.
That's why you have 5 couples.
Yeah.
If you have 3 in the square, you don't use the square.
But you have to notice that.
And there's
be
another
selective.
formula. Let's say you picked out
Thanks,
primary
Mark.
couples, maybe because they're the better couples. So you establish a rule for yourself. If you have 2 primary couples in the same square, then the one with the higher letter will be the primary couple. So Smith will be my primary. And let's say Jones is another primary couple, and they're squared up to the left side of Smith. Fine. There's J is lower than S, so they match the formula. Now, what happens if Jones is squared up to the right of couple Smith? Well, then they didn't square up right, so you don't use them. Yeah, you don't use them. Yeah.
Let's have our dancers take a break. Yeah. Give him a big hand. Give him a big hand. Wait a minute. We got it. Butch, come on up. We got a comment right here. Well, all right, but I want to hear the comment on the mic first. Go ahead.
Harry Morgan from North Carolina.
Yeah.
The problem I find is that 2 of the girls will have slipped and traded and be in the wrong place, or maybe 2 of the boys. And I'm trying to resolve my square, and I know who my primary is, and I know who my secondary is. I know who's Alaman left with the right guy. But I can't put that other girl back where she belongs for another 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever it takes for me to get that girl back in the right place, to get that couple in place where they need to be, so I can do my Alaman left or my right and left grand. So that's my biggest problem, is when one person in that square gets in the wrong place. I don't know how to get her back.
What I hear you saying is you're only watching one square. Oh. At that point, what I do is I say, yeah, you can force them to get back, and it's going to take 2 or 3 minutes. It's not worth the pain and the aggravation. And I just say, I call an Alaman left, promenade back home. I say, somebody made a mistake. The people are out. It's not necessarily you. It's somebody. Square back home. Cut your losses and start over. Don't. Well, callers don't make mistakes. Butch.
Butch Adams from Washington, D.C. The answer I have to you, all 4 men, star left, pick up your original partner and take her home. That'll always, and everybody will laugh when they do it. They say, oh, he lost himself again. So,
you can only do that twice a night, and then it gets old.
One of the things I always use, in addition to my squares and my primary and couple, is I have found that something happens and it gives me a mental image of what happens. So I like to do something that makes my mind remember something. So usually the first 2 sequences I'll call when I'm doing patter are singing call routines memorized that takes me to an Alaman left. And I watch these 2 people right here, this big guy and that lady, and let me have the head star through. Square through 3/4. In my mind, I'm seeing those 2, Alaman left. I'm looking at those 2. I see them doing Alaman left. Square, you're set. Side star through. And now I'm doing another 0 routine as a singing call. Square through 3/4. I'm looking at that big guy and that girl do an Alaman left. I see it in my mind. And for some reason, that really helps me because I do have a memory issue. I can't remember a lot of this stuff. But when I call it and I physically see them doing it, I'm much more comfortable now to go on and start to do some modules or something else once I've got that set in my mind. I'm doing it up here, yeah.
Thank you to the square.
Yeah, thank you,
Appreciate
Square.
it.
Yeah. Thanks, Butch. Like Butch sort of said, it's all mental. This is all mental. Remember, you're calling. You're driving down the road at 65 miles an hour, and you've got a call. You've got to have timing. You've got to have body flow. You've got to have variety. You ever dance to callers who say head square through 4, and then they call about 15 calls in the same box, and you're looking at the same 4 people all the time, and it's like, is there another world out there? Don't get into those ruts. Bring them across the street. Move them around, okay? The beauty of extemporaneous psych calling is it allows you the freedom to call whatever you want, provided the dancers can do it, and call wherever you want and however you want, and then resolve whenever you want. What makes it difficult is the correct resolution, remembering a primary or secondary, and being able to move the dancers and give them variety. Okay, so even though we're concentrating on the term sight choreographer, sight calling, but it also involves, again, let's go back to the basics, knowing where one call ends and when one call begins. Most timing issues from callers is because, especially newer callers, in my experience, they don't know where the call ends. They say it, and then you stop. You ever do stop-go dancing? Especially to maybe newer callers, or go to the national convention someday, go to a major festival, and go to some of these halls and listen to these callers and start to become aware of timing, of body flow, of sight call. You're going to pick up. You're going to say, "That's a module. That's a module. That's not sight calling. That's a module. There's no way that's sight calling, especially if they do something really." 2 people on the outside, 1 person looking here, and this and that. But then you'll start saying, wow, the timing's pretty good. That body flow's pretty good. Look at the way he says, I didn't even see that get out. Past the ocean to a right and left grand. Like, wow. You can have wows too, but it comes with practice. Any other questions, experiences? Yes. Anyone finding this helpful?
I didn't realize it at the time. Of course, Sharon from Thomasville, North Carolina. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was at a dance one night, and the caller actually said, I need couples 1 and 2 to do a right and left through, and I want you to dance there. later, after I learned to call, I realized he was lining up his primary and secondary couples. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't understand why. But as I thought about it later on, I realized what those people had on, and I understood what he was doing.
Yeah. But, you know, you don't want to rely on that the rest of your calling career, because then you're not really growing. You're not helping yourself.
That's a big downer as a dancer. Oh, he's got to do that to be able to call the dance. And that leads me to another thing. If a club has in a guest call, we talked about writing down your corners. And at a big festival, you can understand why that is probably a good thing to do, because there's so many people there. If you have a guest caller, a big name guest caller into your home club, and he's up there and says, all right, everybody square up. My reaction as a dancer is, here we got this big name caller, and he can't even remember who his corners are. He has to write them down. And to me, that just lowers the image a little bit. And I never want anybody to think of me that way, and that's why I don't write them down. I force my mind to be finely tuned, and then...
Question up front first, and then Butch. There you go.
I know a lot of people.
Butch, come on.
I'm Harry Morgan from North Carolina. I know a lot of people remember Mike Jacobs, and I'm sure you do. Mike Jacobs would always be up on the stage writing down as people were squaring up. It looked like he was writing them down. And I found out after Mike died that he never wrote them down, but it forced him to look at and memorize without writing them down. So he didn't have them on paper, but he had them in his mind once it was over.
When in doubt, take your cell phone, take a picture of the front square and lay it right there. Go ahead and call. And there are 2 national callers that have done that with me a number of times. They just take a picture with their cell phone and lay it down.
All right. Question, yes.
I was just going to make a comment. Jenny Reese from Pennsylvania. One of the first times when I went to a big dance in Jersey, and I was psych calling for people I didn't know, writing colors and costume down, and I found a really good couple. And she had a red skirt on, so I had red skirt, white blouse. And I'm calling, and I go to resolve. Oh, shoot, there's another red skirt right over there. So I just called, and I watched their faces. And I called an alley and left, and one guy went, I said, keep on going, don't slow down. So you can tell a lot by your dancers' faces, too. If you get that wrong corner, they're going to know it.
Yeah, you'll run into, I was at the Hey Lollies in Houston literally on Valentine's Day this year. It's a Thursday night club. It's a very big club. And we had 16 squares or so on the floor. About 15 and a half of them had all red and all white. And most of them were club people, so they had club outfits. So now I scratched that idea because I got 4 couples in with me with all red and white on. So now I got to go beyond that. So I got to drill down. Do I look for tall? Do I look for short? Do I look for glasses? Do I look for, blonde, brunette? Whatever. Some people say they look at shoes. Some lady callers say we look at the lady's shoes, and they can remember. Whatever it takes for you to remember, it's okay. Just be successful. I mean, dancers don't care. They're not up there saying, "Gee, I wonder if he's looking at us as primary couple and everything." And well, we don't really match, but they're not thinking any of that. They just came to the dance to have a good time. It's your job to bring them back. If you are going to psych call, it's your responsibility to not just psych call correctly with all the balls juggling in the air. It's also your responsibility to have a correct resolution.
We're just about out of time.
We have one
Just
other
last
comment.
question.
I was calling a national in Winnipeg back a few years back, and there was in the advanced room we had 2 squares right in front of me. Turned out there was all 16 of them were beautiful Japanese ladies.
Very hard.
And my solution was modules.
That's really tough. They all look alike.
2 things right just before, because we're over here already. First of all, when you're sight calling and you have several squares on the floor, avoid, even though you may pick out 2 or 3 squares for your primary and secondary couple, avoid the trap, and it's a sneaky trap, of concentrating on one square. You say to yourself, I got 3 squares, but I'm going to concentrate on this one because they look pretty good. And then halfway into your tip, they break down and say, okay, I'll go to this other square. I forgot who I chose because I haven't thought about them for a while. And second, when you choose your squares, choose them in different parts of the hall. You ever go to some of the big name traveling callers and you see them up on the stage and they're always looking like this because they're always, that's where their primary couple or primary squares are, or on this side. People over here feel neglected.
Oh yeah,
What are we, chopped liver over here? Why don't you look over here once in a while?
Some of them make it very obvious, and I've told callers that they'll say square through, forward, and right, left through, and swing through, and there's like people all the way out there. So you're making it too obvious. Last question.
Hi, it's Chris Stacy from DC, and this is something that I think Ed and Butch almost said, which is that when you're doing your resolves, every time you're coming in for your square through 3 and element left or whatever it is, every time you see that resolve happen, that's another opportunity to burn further into your mind, oh yeah, it's those guys. The act of seeing them come together, do the resolve, that was a success for you. You can use that to reinforce that, you know, those are the people to help you remember.
Take a snapshot. But how about a nice hand, Mr. Ed Foote?
One final thing on the back table, the handouts. Feel free to make copies of any of that stuff and give it to anybody you want. A couple of the things I mentioned about the 3 methods. We all hear about what to call, what good stuff to call. I have a handout called Bad Choreography. It's 150 things you never want to call. But I don't just say don't call it because I said so. After each one, there's a reason why you don't call it. Also, on the back of the How to Remember Primary and Secondary in 3 Squares are 2 commonly asked questions about sight calling, so don't forget to flip the page over. There's an excellent article on timing by Jim Mayo that was in American Square Dance Magazine. That's back there. Also, my articles that many of you have seen that have been handed out around the world called Tips for New Dancers, Tips for Better Dancing, How to Look Good When You're Dancing. Any of that stuff, feel free to make copies, print anywhere, do anything you want with them. I'll have a nice hand for Ken.
We want to thank you, and thanks for coming. You've been a great audience and participation, and enjoy the rest of the convention.